Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Stand up and fight, because when you stand up and fight, the person beside you stands up and fights. And when our party stands up and fights, the nation stands up and fights. And when our nation stands up and fights, other nations stand up and fight. And they stand up and fight for the things upon which the entire progress of humanity depends. Freedom. That is what conservatives do.
That was Penny Mordaunt, the former Defence Secretary, who lost her seat in last year's historic defeat of the Conservatives in the general election. She was speaking there when few thought the fight might actually come to Britain. Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker. President Donald Trump's return to the White House is threatening a lasting transatlantic split. It has caused the biggest shake-up in military thinking in Europe in decades. Here in the UK, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer recently announced plans to increase defence spending, you know that, to 2.5% by 2027, paid for by overseas development budget cuts, and then a further increase to 3% over the next decade. But there have also been a series of emergency meetings and pledges to shore up Ukraine's defence and launch European rearmament this week. Most Britons don't remember a world at war. This feels like a generational change. So joining me now to discuss is Penny Mordaunt, the former Defence Secretary. She says she hopes to contest a seat in Parliament at the next general election. Penny, welcome to the programme and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Would you ever have predicted what the White House is doing? Cutting military aid to Ukraine, some intelligence sharing too, and blaming the country for the war?
So look, I think although it's been a very difficult few weeks, there has been a logic to what the president has been doing. He has wanted Ukraine to come to the negotiating table. He has wanted to metaphorically kick Britain and Europe up the backside in terms of their defence spending and motivate them to spend more on protecting their own neighbourhood. And he has not wanted this war to continue. So although it has been very difficult and there's been some very difficult things to listen to and witness, he has got people where he wants them to be now. And I think the pressure is now on him because he has run for office on the basis that he's going to bring this war to an end. And now he has all the pieces he needs to do that if his plan is going to work. So I think it's been difficult, but there is a logic. I think other things that have been going on with regard to tariffs and other things that the White House has been doing, I think it's less certain what the plan is behind that. So, I mean, we're only a few weeks into the administration. I think business is really suffering as a consequence of all this change and flux. But with regard to Ukraine, there's a logic to the president's actions.
That's interesting. Logic. There's a real threat, though, from Moscow. The EU Defence Commissioner, who was speaking to us this morning, saying that Russia may be ready for war again within the space of 3 years.
Yes, I mean, there is, with regard to the immediate future, Russia is clearly stepping up its activity against Ukraine. Overnight, it's been hitting more energy infrastructure. I think we've had 18 civilians, including 4 children, killed overnight. It is not slowing down. If anything, it is starting to speed up. And we've just got to remember this is a very, very hot war. About 16,000 shells are fired a day. It is immense. And Russia are not rolling back from any of that. So this is why the pressure is now really on the President of the United States. This activity is going to escalate. He needs to calm that down. We need to get to a ceasefire. And I think the pressure is really on him. But you're absolutely right. The most important thing in all of this, and really where Europe can contribute, is to deter future Russian aggression. That's why we need really an emergency defence preparation programme, and it's good to see the EU talking in those terms. But that does require certainty over the investment that is going in. And at the moment, the UK is not doing enough. They've stepped up a bit, but we are not doing enough yet. If we do it well, it will deter Russia. But if we fail to prepare, then we are going to be faced with exactly the same scenario, perhaps worse, in a few years.
Russia's shown no indication of wanting a ceasefire. They've not said anything like that publicly. In terms of paying for that additional defence spending, Rachel Reeves is considering cuts to the welfare budget ahead of the spring statement on the 26th of March. Tories didn't get a grip on this. Would you be in favour of those welfare cuts? Would that be enough?
So the kinds of cuts that we were outlining to welfare, where we're in office now, was a similar exercise we did a few years ago, which found around 12 billion. There's more you can certainly do. But I think this is the only course of action that the government can take, because it needs to do two things. It's got to find, based on NATO's analysis, about another 20 billion of defence spending, annual defence spending. Now, that is not impossible with the trillion-pound economy that we have, but given the debt we're carrying, there's still the legacy issues we have from COVID in our public services, it's going to be a hard price to pay. We've got to do it, because if we leave it, for reasons we've already touched on, the price we will end up paying will be unbearable. We will be at war, and our whole objective should be to try and prevent that from happening. But I think the Chancellor has to do something else as well. And that is, she has got to listen to business. We've seen just the volatility that we have had with announcements coming out from the United States. Markets are not reacting well to that. Businesses are currently shedding costs, they're shedding staff, they're shelving plans. And if you want to try and give us the best chance of getting good growth back into our economy and the economies of our allies, you have to have some stability and some assistance for business. The last budget really destroyed a lot of that. And so she's got to do those things in parallel. Not easy, but possible. And that requires her to control government expenditure.
Okay, a couple of points I'd like to make on that then. In terms of the increase in defence spending, it would have been better for the UK to think about this earlier. The Conservatives presided over a big decline in the UK's military capabilities, even though I know you expressed that sort of concern at the time. You're also a Navy reservist yourself, but the armed forces were still hollowed out under the Tories, and that historically can be seen as an enormous failure, given that the first invasion of Ukraine was in 2014.
So look, I think there were some things that we got right. When we came in 2010, the size of the black hole in the defence budget was roughly twice the size of the defence budget. So RUSI calculated the deficit and the equipment programme deficit as well as being about £71 billion. So completely unsustainable. So I think, painful though it was, the 2010 Strategic Defence Review did a good job of shelving programs that were going nowhere and were vastly expensive, and focusing on the capabilities we really needed. And I also think that the push that we did towards standing up a stronger reserve force as well as conventional force was right. But yes, I have argued for some time, including when I was Defence Secretary, that we needed to get serious about spending more on defence, and also giving industry the certainty it needs over many years to really invest in the kind of research and development we want to see, but also the manufacturing capabilities we need to sustain supplies to our armed forces. So I completely take that and have been consistent with that. And that is why I hope that the government now will listen to what I and many others from across the political divide are saying. We really do need to wake up now. if we end up with lots of summits across Europe saying that we need to rearm, but we fail to actually do what is required, we will be in a situation where we'll be facing war. I mean, that a lot of commentators are calling this now a pre-war period. We have to do this now. If you leave it, the price that we will pay will be in not just in treasure, but in blood.
Yeah, which is enormously alarming. And I'm sure that voters are not, perhaps quite fully cognizant of that yet. But the difficulties is in delivering that. Does defence procurement have to be independent of the United States now? Surely many could argue for that. Our nuclear capability, Trident, is tied to US technology. You look to Ukraine, dependent on US technology, on Starlink, on the US government. Does British defence procurement have to be independent of the US?
Well, I wouldn't want to see that be an outcome from this. And there is discussions around setting up what are being termed as defence banks. There's one particular initiative which just wants it to be Europe focused, another which wants to have it open also to the United States. And I've always been of the latter school of thought. Just because of how our militaries operate with each other, you want, particularly in NATO, you want that interoperability. You want nations to be figuring out what they are really good at. I mean, historically, in the UK, we've been really good at innovation, sonar, radar, those sorts of things. Other nations have their strengths. And you really want nations that are going to be fighting together to work together and cooperate together on defence procurement and be open to working with each other throughout all of that and making those good decisions. You need reliable partners to do that. And I think that is currently being tested. But we already have some warm words from the United States when it has seen Europe responding to its concerns, that it will be there in the future. And I think we can also take some comfort, even though I understand why people will be disappointed in it, from the US's reluctance to expand NATO to cover Ukraine as well. I think that is in part because of their commitment to the alliance. So we will see how things progress, but I think it is in everyone's interests that we keep the United States engaged, that we keep them as a partner in defence. Across the globe, they're providing some really unique capabilities in particular places that we have relied on for a long time. And I, for one, would not see that change.
In terms of NATO, many say that it's actually dead already. Do you think it survives the Trump era? President Trump has called for US territorial expansion, making Canada the 51st state, buying Greenland, reclaiming the Panama Canal. Quite optimistic to think that, talk of reliable partners when some people think that NATO is gone already.
Well, look, two things. Firstly, on NATO, I think NATO is really strong. And I've been close to it for most of my parliamentary career, and I have watched it strengthen in recent years. In part, that is because of pressure from the United States for the Europe to step up, not just in terms of what it's spending, but its commitment to the alliance, to training exercises and working together on a whole raft of things. So I think NATO is in great shape. It's had some really good leadership in recent years. And I think the situation in Ukraine, awful though it is, one of the positives that has come from it is the galvanizing of that alliance. So I don't agree with you with your suggestion that it is not in good shape. I do think there is a wider question about some of the things that the United States has been doing. One of the things that J.D. Vance said recently, having a go at the Labour government's policy on free speech, was, what is it we're actually defending here? It's surely the values and the principles that we share. He was echoing, I think, General Eisenhower, when he was president, his attitude towards national security, that you had to have regard to those things that we were defending, because if you didn't, what was the point of defending them? And you could term those things as the things that made America great in the first place. And I think if the US doesn't have regard to those things, it will undermine its own position, its own economic primacy, its own hard power primacy, because the world has been very happy for the United States to have primacy in those areas, quite happy for an American to go unchallenged to be the chief exec of the World Bank, for example, or everyone very comfortable with the dollar as reserve currency. Those are things that are in the US's interest to hang on to. How tolerant countries will be of those sorts of things continuing if the United States does not have regard to those fundamental values that we hold dear, that remains to be seen. So I think it is important that the US continues to think about those things as being part of its national security policy.
Yeah, I mean, that perhaps is a slow wheel turning, isn't it, versus the immediate sort of threats that Europe or the UK, more immediate medium-term threats that the UK and Europe may face. Look, I want to come back around to the idea, Penny, if I may, that you want to get back into Parliament. Obviously, that's quite some way off. The Conservatives don't seem to have really regrouped since the election defeat last year. Perhaps there's still a lot more thinking to be done about that. Reform UK continues to benefit in some ways from the failures of the Conservatives, you could argue. Thinking about the new platform for the Conservatives, would you still be the party of defence and security? How can you promise tax cuts when the fiscal position is so difficult? What do you think about now, you know, how the Conservatives do in opposition and what they think about their policy platform for the next election?
Well, look, the first thing is we need to focus on the needs of the country, and we need to focus on doing well as a party. I don't think we can be distracted by what Reform is doing, and you're starting to see the wheels coming off them slightly, in part because of how they've reacted to recent events, but also some of the personalities in there. So I think you can't respond to what others are doing. You need to be focused on yourself and on getting yourself to be worthy of people's votes. And I think part of the reason why we lost the election is that we were not worthy of people's votes, and a lot of it was about how people had behaved.
Are the Tories still the sister party? Are the Tories still the sister party to the Republicans, or is it Reform UK?
Well, I don't think Reform UK is a party that has those kinds of relationships. I mean, for a long time, the Conservative Party has been a party that has a good network in local government as well as national government, and those relationships persist. I mean, for example, next week I'm seeing the mayor of Oklahoma City, a Republican who I've known for several years, who's coming to the UK. Those relationships, I think, I would argue, are just as important as relationships at the top of the party. So I don't think it's quite the same situation. Reform have only just starting to change their structure to look like a proper political party as you'd recognise it. But I think what we have to do is focus on what the country needs. We haven't for a long time been the party of business. We've not engaged with business. We've not listened to business. I think in the last few years in office, we didn't do enough to support business. We didn't do enough to support the self-employed and small business people in particular. And we've got to get back to that. Without governments and would-be governments listening to business, we're never going to get the economy in the shape that we want. So I think it's that sort of thing that we need to be focusing on now.
So my thanks to Penny Mordaunt, the former Defence Secretary, for speaking to me as Britain looks, along with Europe, to suddenly pivot to full-scale rearmament with no simple choices on Ukraine and the threat from Russia. That is it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen. This episode was produced by James Wilcock. Our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm Caroline Hepker and we'll be back with more next week. This is Bloomberg. That is the former Defence Secretary speaking to me here on Bloomberg Radio. My thanks to you. So, in what has been a really momentous week in terms of changes in Europe, there'll be more meetings, of course, next week as European leaders and the UK think about increased defence spending and rearmament. A moment of great peril, it would seem, and how Europe deals now with Ukraine and the process to get to a peace or ceasefire with Russia. Thank you so much for your time. Coming up then on the programme, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, etc., etc., etc. And again, come back to that. Penny, thank you so much for being with me.